Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for Hay Group's Reward in the Middle East webinar. My name is Larissa Stefanishin, and I'm part of Hay Group's team in Philadelphia. I'd like to let you know that today's webinar is in listen-only mode, and we encourage you to send your questions through the chat feature at the bottom left of your screen. We will be reviewing your questions at the end of the presentation. Also, please note that you can maximize the screen in the upper right-hand corner just to make the slides easier to read. Today's call is scheduled for an hour, and we'll spend about half the time going through the presentation and leaving the rest of the time to go through any questions that came through the chat. Lastly, please know that all attendees will receive a copy of today's presentation for future reference. Today's presenters are Harish Bhatia and Geeta Kapoor. Harish manages Hay Group's productized services business in the Gulf region. Harish has been working with Hay Group for 5 years now, with a focus on advising organizations across various sectors. Geeta is an account manager in the productized services business and has been with Hay Group for over 3 years. In her role, she has worked on various projects with government, local, and multinational organizations across the region to review their pay and benefits framework and also to provide insight into the market best practices. She also works closely with clients to conduct employee effectiveness surveys and helps clients to manage their recruitment and talent development programs. I want to thank both Harish and Geeta for taking the time today to talk to us about Reward in the Middle East. Now I'll pass it over to Geeta to start us off.
Thank you, Larissa. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us this morning. We understand that being in HR, you have the responsibility for several regions, including Middle East, which is one of the growing markets. Today, we are all logged into this webinar to help you gain a wider perspective on what's happening on the ground in this region. The presentation today is broadly segmented in 3 different but related themes, which will be done by Harish and myself. The first theme covers the global perspective and about the wider outlook in GCC. We will also briefly discuss about what is happening in each GCC country and understand how that is shaping up Reward in this region. The second theme extends the discussion to the wider MENA region, and we will identify how the current situation in these countries is impacting HR in the long run. In the last section of this webinar, Harish will take you through the regional business outlook study, which will give you a reality check on how organizations in Middle East are performing today and what they foresee in the future. As Larissa mentioned, anytime during the webinar, if you have any questions, please send them to us and we'll take them all together towards the end of this webinar. The results that we will share today are based on not just the periodic pay seminars that we conduct in the region, but also on the business outlook study that we have been conducting since 2009. Each year, around this time, we get in touch with organizations in Middle East to understand how businesses are projecting growth in the coming months. What are the key challenges concerning them? What are their top HR priority areas for the year ahead, and so forth. I think the study helps us not just to reaffirm the facts that we see as a result of our surveys and research, but it also reconciles the agenda of CEOs with that of HR. This year, the results are based on responses from over 860 organizations from 14 Middle East countries. And although banking and oil and gas are the prime sectors in this region, we saw strong participation numbers from several other sectors and industries such as FMCG, retail, manufacturing, etc. We will be touching upon the results of this study later in this webinar, and we will also circulate the copy of the results with you. Before we deep dive into understanding what's happening in the region, I think it would be good to show you a broader picture with a global and regional context. We looked upon the research from our global offices, but also from recent news. So here's a summary to paint a picture for you all. The North American economies are the largest consumption markets, and that supports more robust growth. We also see positive economic indicators and forecast figures. The focus on these regions is mainly on creation of jobs and on reversing the effects of outsourcing. Not to say the North Americas are also increasing their oil production, which makes it a competition for the Middle East region. In Europe, we see a large region with mixed results from Germany's surpluses to Greece's and Spain's defaults. The large issues are around stagnancy in business growth. Demographics are not very supportive either. With high unemployment rates, some economies are entering into a vicious circle of low income and low spending markets. There is, however, a focus on creation of jobs. Moving on to South America, which is a vibrant economy and region, but it could do better with macroeconomic planning. The on-ground realities highlight the difficulties of a fast-paced growing market. The focus in this market is basically on sustainable long-term growth. However, the short-term objectives are currently keeping these markets busy. The demographics in Asia explains it all. Businesses see immense potential in the market. However, the consumer preferences are difficult, plus the patterns vary. Business world's focus in this region is primarily to adopt the global offerings to individual unique markets. When it comes to Middle East, amidst the global phenomena, the Middle East did experience tremors of economic disorder, but having said that, we do have some small, well-managed economies with a focus on government infrastructure spending. New jobs are being created in the market, and there is a constant improvement in the living conditions to even bring us closer to the most developed economies in the world. As you will see when Harish takes you through the business outlook study results later during the webinar, expansion is on the cards for organizations in this region. GCC countries have strong economies built on oil wealth. However, with the population in this region growing 3 times faster than the rest of the world and an increasing per capita income, GCC is witnessing a shift of economic landscape. It is no more just an oil-based economy. Increasing purchasing power has made the GCC a consumer's market, driving high demand for service-based industries. And this provides businesses with an opportunity to explore different segments and in turn create a competitive environment where everyone is trying to get the bigger pie of the growing market share. When it comes to economic indicators of GCC, we see that GCC is witnessing an increase in confidence and a return to form despite destabilization of the wider region's socio-economic situation. The region is redirecting its efforts towards sustainable development and competitiveness to maintain and expand its position in the international market. Growth prospects definitely remain favorable as it is supported not just by high oil prices but also by large infrastructure development projects. Economies of UAE and Qatar especially are witnessing an increased economic activity because of the two major global events, one being the Expo 2020, which is to be hosted in Dubai, and the other being FIFA 2022, which is to be hosted in Qatar. Both these world events provide a lucrative opportunity for the services industries in particular. Qatar, for example, has the highest income per capita in the world, as you can see on the slide. And this is due to a relatively smaller population of Qatari nationals in the country. Having said that, this still provides opportunities for the services industries to thrive as people can afford to pay for the world-class services. On the back of these world events, there is also a steady flow of government development spending to boost sectors such as tourism, real estate, retail, etc. So if you're in the region, then the frequent road diversions and cranes in the vicinity will definitely prove that the economies are back in action and are on an upward growth trajectory. I think similar to UAE and Qatar, Oman government is also making further efforts to capitalize on the tourism industry. In fact, Muscat, which is the capital of Oman, was named the second best city to visit in the world in 2012, and this was given to them by the travel guide publisher Lonely Planet. Moving on, to achieve these objectives, each GCC country has its own detailed visionary plan for growth. Analyzing each vision statement has led us to conclude that there are certain common plans for strategic growth. There is a definite focus on human development with the need of educating local talent. The objective here is to maintain a sustainable, competitive economy as well as ensuring the ability to attract the right international talent. Moving away from the public sector is also on the agenda of the GCC economy, and most of them plan to achieve this by developing a strong private sector. As mentioned on the previous slide, a lot of governments are investing in non-oil related sectors such as construction, tourism, retail, etc. Providing gainful and productive employment for the growing populations is also a priority for GCC. There is the need to develop education programs to cultivate local talent in a way that will expand their abilities in the private sector. The government is also looking at enhancing the quality of life, and as a result, there are large-scale ongoing projects and also a few in the pipeline to develop new schools, colleges, hospitals, airports, which are all at par with international standards. Going ahead, in this economic context, the focus of business has shifted towards marginal business growth with an eye on rapidly rising costs. There are essentially three themes to summarize the business landscape. Capture market share with the cost control, especially in an environment where the costs of doing business are on a constant rise. Businesses need to be mindful of the increasing cost of labor, the increasing cost of living, increasing prices of properties, particularly in markets like UAE and Qatar. This of course calls for businesses to have an optimal business model with leaner processes. Nationalization, of course, is on the agenda of all the economies. Countries like Saudi Arabia have mandatory quotas for nationalization. To meet this target, there has to be a planned effort in not just increasing the number of nationals in your businesses, but also doing so in a sustainable manner. A lot of local businesses have also developed the capability to go global. However, there is still room for improvising and adjusting the mindset in professionalizing work streams. This definitely calls for their people strategy to be aligned to global standards. With the businesses in the region picking up, there will be a need to develop and nurture local talent. Having said that, let's now have a quick insight into each GCC country. In countries like UAE, sectors like retail, tourism, and hospitality are expected to expand by 2018 and will be the major contributors to the GDP growth, all with an agenda to support the Expo 2020. UAE also aims to focus more on building the infrastructure for transport, which includes projects like Etihad Rail, monorail, and expansion in the metro lines. The UAE government is also actively supporting the private sector companies to take new initiatives in order to attract new nationals in the private sector workforce. In Qatar, there is a large-scale infrastructure development to keep pace with the rising expectations due to the major events and economic growth. Qatar is also largely dependent on the technical expertise of the expat population to grow the economy. And this is evidenced by the ratio of large expatriates to nationals in the workforce. In Saudi Arabia, high oil revenue levels will boost business and investor confidence, but the major risk is the scenario of a global growth meltdown, which could bring a sustainable decline in oil prices. The Netakat program, which drives the agenda of nationalization in Saudi, has been a double-edged sword. It has created opportunities for nationals on one hand, but it has also increased the labor cost to employ nationals. Private sector companies in Saudi have been strongly opposing this move, primarily due to lack of availability of skilled local talent, and also due to the fact that retaining nationals is a key challenge for private organizations. In Oman, there are suitable employment opportunities being created for the Omani nationals by the government. Also, Oman has recently adjusted the minimum remuneration of Omani nationals to increase the cost of living. and it has also introduced a new pension scheme which will be in effect from July 2014. In Bahrain, the economy is set to grow at 4% in 2014 with inflation forecasted at a low of 2.6%. Bahrain is also one of the economies where, although we've seen some socio-economic activity happening in the past, people-related practices have been fairly stable. When it comes to reward in these countries, although there are certain factors which define the GCC, each country has its own unique practice. Largely driven by an expatriate workforce, the remuneration packages in GCC consist of a basic salary and a basket of allowances such as housing, transportation, utilities, which together form the guaranteed take-home pay of an employee. Now, these varied allowances were introduced primarily with the objective of attracting and supporting foreign workforce. But over the years, this has found its way into the employment contract of country nationals too. There are also certain benefits such as children's education and annual vacation travel, which are commonly practiced across the Gulf. The GCC has also witnessed a greater influx of Western workers over the past decade, and this has been more so due to the attractive employment opportunities that GCC provides in comparison to their local home countries. Driven largely by the demand of the oil and gas sector, the GCC countries currently are poised in the short term to attract talent. However, with the nationalization agenda being championed by governments, it will become difficult for private companies to maintain the targets. As I mentioned in my earlier slide, nationalization has been a priority of governments in the Gulf region, and it continues to be so. At one end of the spectrum, we have countries like Bahrain and Oman, which already have a high proportion of nationals in the workforce, while there are countries like Saudi, which have introduced the Nitakat program to boost the employment of Saudi nationals in the workforce. Several initiatives like these have actually resulted in differentiation in salaries for nationals and non-nationals, where in certain countries you could definitely find that the nationals are paid a premium as an attraction strategy to meet the nationalization targets. Despite the availability of employees, the GCC is still facing a talent crunch, and this is largely due to lack of specific skills, competencies and experience available in the local workforce, which makes it difficult for organizations to hire the right employees for the right job and at the right pay levels. Going ahead, Harish will take you through the reward practices and the impact in the wider MENA region.
Thank you very much, Geeta. So before we go into understanding a little more about the wider MENA region, I think Geeta has given us a good summary of what's happening in the Gulf, or the GCC countries, like we call it here. I'm just going to go into some specifics before we start speaking of the MENA region. One topic being nationalization in the Gulf. We understand that it does have a very large impact on rewards. Now, just to give some insights to all of you, we see the gap in pay levels ranging from 10% to all the way to 70% across the GCC. So in countries like UAE and Qatar, we see the nationals of the country getting paid 60 to 70% higher salaries for the same roles and positions that they work in as compared to peers or their expatriate peers in the organization. And that's causing the big trouble in the private sector, where the private sector largely cannot afford to recruit nationals as part of their workforce. So it's a hindrance, but it's also a way of distributing wealth for the rulers of the countries. And so it's a double-edged sword, and it's a key problem for the countries of the Gulf for the next 5 to 7 years. Also, just to give a little summary on the total compensation package of the region, mainly in the Gulf, since it's a very largely expatriate-driven market, we see compensation in the region also includes a range of different allowances, everything from housing, transportation, utilities, furniture allowance, etc. So just like you see expatriate-based packages, most packages locally in these countries of the GCC region are very expatriate models. And we can certainly provide more details about that in our annual reports. So that's a little bit about the GCC. We'd be happy to take more questions. Please put them on the chat or email it to us after this presentation. Moving forward, we've split the presentation to look at the wider MENA region separately this year. And that's because the picture in the wider MENA region is a little different. We spoke about the Gulf region, of course, flourishing economies, oil-based countries, so certainly a different picture here. Within the wider MENA region, we're going to talk about countries like Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, which we call the Levant region here, and then Egypt, Iran, and Iraq. Different set of economies, and they pose totally different, unique issues for businesses. Most of these markets have large local populations, but unstable governments and lack of central support or vision from the government for a long term. The small local businesses are fairly stagnant, and the large companies are focused on growing beyond borders. So really leveraging their expertise to go beyond. Moving further, in the same format as we presented the Gulf earlier, just showing you some figures in a summary format on the economic trends in the region. So we see Lebanon, Jordan, Syria with low income per capita, starkly lower than what we see in the Gulf region, and that also causes issues for them in terms of workforce wanting to move to the Gulf region, where there is larger demand for Arabic-speaking talent, and this causes issues for businesses that are based in these countries. The inflation rates in these countries are relatively higher, and that also is putting pressure on local businesses, which are grappling to have long-term objectives of growth in unstable environments where the governments are not focused on any infrastructure or service planning for the commercial world. So overall, we see a lack of long-term commitment versus how we see it in the Gulf, where we see almost 10-20-year plans being made already, lack of any infrastructure development, people wanting to move out of these countries. So generally, a more grim picture than what we see in the Gulf region. So speaking specifically about each market, starting with Lebanon, a market with great potential for consumer demand. FMCG companies, IT companies, and banking sector are thriving. However, there's safety and instability issues and constant concerns that are barring large organizations from planning expansion in these countries. In fact, we also see many of the local grown organizations from Lebanon wanting to move out their base and head offices because there's general concern of life and safety in the country. Jordan, a small economy but stagnant and suffering from the lack of economic reforms. It boasts of being a hub for the IT sector in the Middle East, so that's a large advantage for the economy. Also boasts of being pretty much the outsource zone for the Arab countries with Arabic-speaking capabilities. Again, it suffered from the troubles of its neighboring countries like Syria and Lebanon. Egypt is a large, vibrant economy with very vast potential and a large population as well. However, in the last 24 months, we've seen geopolitical issues that have caused a setback for the economy in terms of currency, in terms of international trade, and also tourism, which is one of their largest GDP contributors, and also the employer. We are seeing things improving generally in the business world with the recent news on the constitution setup. But we still don't see a long-term view from companies for business in Egypt. But certainly it is a market that most multinational organizations want to keep a view on because as it opens up and frees from any geopolitical tensions, it will be one of the growth markets in the region. And then Iraq and Iran, which were markets fairly similar in the past, but now they have very unique characteristics of their own. Iraq is largely dominated by oil and gas companies, most of them coming from the US, in fact, that are setting up base. So there's prime interest there for this sector. Many Gulf-based organizations are setting up retail ventures, FMCG companies, distribution outlets, and also banks that are working in partnership with Gulf companies. The demand for talent is certainly sprucing up. We see differences in pay for nationals and expatriates. There's also a range of allowances that are paid to employees that travel into Iraq for business, and that's something that's still very dominant. We also see a trend of expertise being flown into Dubai or in neighboring countries of the Gulf to be based here and then flying into Iraq just for work when needed. In Iran, as we all know, we've seen business sanctions for most part of the last 2 to 3 years with several global partners. We see very little movement and change in the economic factors, except of course there's very high inflation rate because most imports and exports are banned in the country. So not much movement there, but as things improve, we'd see changes in the economic factors. So we earlier spoke about the factors that influence reward in the GCC region. In a similar format, we've looked at what are the factors that influence reward in the MENA region. Some of the factors are connected. So the first one being high inflation. Here we see a real income erosion for the population living in these countries. Since the salaries are not growing at the same rate as the inflation, we see the purchasing power of employees living in these countries is reducing, which causes a lot of them to start looking at greener pastures in the Gulf region for jobs. Connected with the second point where we see skilled talent wants to move to GCC, they get lucrative packages and a better lifestyle to live in. So these are factors that are impacting overall reward in the wider MENA region, in countries like Egypt, in countries like Jordan and Lebanon, where there is Arabic-speaking talent available. These are headhunted usually and posted into countries of the Gulf. And generally, as part of our jobs, we get a lot of requests from companies in the wider MENA region wanting to benchmark and compare themselves with the Gulf. Unfortunately, they cannot afford to pay those same salary levels like the Gulf does. We're also seeing stagnant talent demand in these specific countries. A lot of the companies are not planning to grow for the long term, and that's why there is not much demand for talent in the long run as well.
This is our first polling question for everybody during the webinar. If you could please take a moment to answer the question and then please hit submit. Thank you.
This was a quick question just to understand and show you what is the ease of doing business in the Middle East. The data comes from the World Bank figures. We've taken the rankings of all the Middle East countries. As you will see on the slides here, the top 6 are certainly the Gulf countries, with UAE being on the top, and with surprise entry of Saudi Arabia as well. So, of course, these countries have large potential for most multinationals to come in and start business here. But there are barriers to business, certainly in terms of ownership, in terms of how they set up, in terms of employment. So there are certain barriers, but there are also tax-free economies, which makes it more lucrative for business to come and set up. We see, of course, as we go lower into the wider MENA region, most countries fall in the lower end of the ranking table, as they generally have geopolitical tensions, and they're not the easiest places to set up business today. So we spoke about the economy, generally what's happening in these markets. In the next few slides, I'm going to walk you through some results of the business outlook study that is in the 6th year of its running in the Middle East. We basically go out and ask questions to organizations to understand what they perceive and how they forecast their growth, and how is that impacting people performance and also people movement for them in these economies. Our first question to the market, to these 850 organizations, was what is their key focus area for management? And as you'll see on the slide here, 82% of the organizations are focused on growth, on higher market share, on increased profitability. Very few organizations here are looking at any kind of cost reduction or any kind of reduction in future potential. This speaks large volumes of what's happening in the market. Certainly companies want to prepare themselves for this growth to come. The demographics are very favorable, and companies in most sectors, especially the services sectors, want to go out and capture most of what they can in these upcoming 5 years. We also asked organizations how realistic are their targets, and this has been a popular subject of discussion because Middle East was really looked at a place where they could make faster profitability and faster money for most multinationals. However, that's changed. There's more ambition, but also realistic timeline expectations. In prior years, when we asked such questions, organizations would come back with a timeline of 6 to 12 months or even lower to achieve their strategic objectives. But over time, we've seen signs of maturity, and we've seen local organizations, but also multinationals expecting significant growth, but in the right timeline expectations. So what is the growth that they're expecting? You'll see numbers on here which are not very often seen in any of the global forecasts today. We're seeing 37% of the organizations expecting or forecasting a growth of over 15% annual revenue year on year. That's a very significant number to portray to any business leader today. So certainly there's business potential. We understand it in our industry, but also in every other sector. Banking, oil and gas, and FMCG are some of the largest sectors and employers of this region, and they are generally the sectors that are expecting most of this growth. But of course, there's growth in other sectors. Generally, in the Gulf region, we're seeing infrastructure development, which means it brings in a lot more industries into the market. We're seeing really a big rise in transportation projects, infrastructure projects, and development of just new cities within these cities. Even comparing this number to the 2013 actual numbers, which is also something we've gotten from these organizations, we see there's a large shift to a much larger percentage of companies expecting over 15% growth this year. So overall, it's a forecast for an even better year than 2013. So that's our business results, and that's what the organizations are forecasting generally in this region. How is that impacting people movement and also people management for HR professionals and business leaders of this region? We asked a question around understanding the average attrition rate. We see clerical roles having the highest attrition rate, which is where we also see the highest population of expatriates. These figures show that there are some factors certainly that are not helping organizations to manage these attrition and not even have great retention. We see in this part of the world disengaged employees, especially at lower levels, with clarity levels being low in organizations. There's little long-term ambition or goal for employees to take home. Also, since it's a largely expatriate workforce that comes from various regions of the world, they prefer going back to their own home countries once they have some experience that they've gained there. There are also very few organizations practicing any long-term incentives in this market, which makes it difficult for them to retain employees over a certain period of time. And that's mainly because of regulations and also a culture where they wouldn't want to share equity out and open. It's a little different picture for the executives. Most organizations state that they see executives staying longer in the region today. Especially after the financial crisis of 2009, we are seeing executives sticking to their current jobs for much longer, and also to the region for much longer. Since there are more greener pastures here, a tax-free environment, we don't see Western executives going back from here within a 3 or 5 year time period. We also looked at strategies that organizations are adopting to optimize their organizations and get ready for the future. The topmost priority was redesigning work processes. We see larger role of compliance departments, streamlining of procurement, and just general clarity of roles across the organization for all the levels within the organization. We're also seeing a clear breakdown of the support functions, which was not very core and primary in the past. Today we see organizations that have gone from small to mid-size and mid to large size, which means they are professionalizing and getting ready not only to meet the demand of the local consumers, but also get ready to expand globally or regionally. We've also seen organizations getting creative about redeploying their talent into roles that they fit better. So there is a focus generally in HR to utilize the most of the talent that they have.
This is another question we have for everybody on the call. You can select more than one answer for this question. When you do, just please hit submit. Thank you.
So what you see on the slide is a ranking of the key priority areas that human resource departments or human resource leaders have selected in this region. With the growth environment, an environment where employees have the options to move freely today, we do see different priority areas over years. So if you looked at the same slide in analysis, I would say 3 to 5 years ago, you'd see rewards and benefits being the top criteria for various reasons. One, of course, it was a high inflationary environment. It was a market where businesses were growing, the economy was growing fairly rapidly. So reward and benefit was the top criteria to pull people and to retain them. Today we see organizations being more creative and understanding performance management and how to make most of their people. We're seeing more than half the organizations are focusing on retention of their existing talent and wanting to keep them for the long-term growth of the organization and the business. So generally there is retention, which is key. We see organizations coming to us as Hay Group as well to ask for various ways of doing performance management and retention primarily. Reward and benefits still important, but mainly for high inflation economies of the wider MENA region. In the Gulf, we see a difference between how reward is being managed between the nationals and non-nationals. Certainly there's been a lot of interest in nationals' employment and nationals' pay levels over the last 3-4 years, with most Gulf governments making changes. So just to walk you through the GCC, UAE has made changes to nationals' pay levels sometime in 2009, those earlier, and then we've seen Bahrain, Oman and Saudi making changes directly through the government orders to change pay levels and increase them from 15 to 30%. In Oman, for example, we saw minimum wages increasing almost thrice in the last 24 months. In Qatar, we've seen salaries increase for nationals by 60% at one order. So there's reward and benefit interest, but mainly for national employees and not so much for non-nationals. But of course, we're seeing organizations wanting to retain the rest of their talent for the long-term growth of the organization. So that brings us to the end of this presentation. I hope you found this useful. We do certainly have much more information for the region that we can share and provide reports for, so please do get in touch with us. We've, I think, seen some questions, and if there are other questions in the audience, we'd be very happy to answer them.
Thank you both, Harish and Geeta, for going through the presentation and sharing all that information. I just wanted to take a quick moment and talk about Hay Group's latest product, Hay Group Activate. Hay Group is a suite of apps designed to transform your HR policies into real-world results by empowering managers to take more responsibility for their people. We currently offer 3 different kinds of apps: Leadership Styles and Climate, Grade a Job, and Price a Job, and descriptions of each are listed on the slide in front of you. If you would like to learn more about them, just please visit us at the web address listed below, www.atrium.heygroup.com/us. Now, before we get to your questions that came through the chat, we just have one last question for you. Please select the categories you would like to learn more about after today's presentation. Thank you for your responses, everyone. I just want to remind everyone that today's webinar was recorded and will be posted to our website. All attendees will also receive a copy of the slide deck that was presented today. Now I'll begin to review the questions that came in through the chat. We had a good amount come in, so let's get started. First question we have that came in is, it seems like a few years ago, nationalization was a very hot topic, but has since cooled. Is this true? And if so, why?
Thanks for the question. Well, we still see nationalization being a very hot topic. Of course, it varies in terms of the initiatives that each government is taking. We understand that there are specific plans being put in place. In fact, there are councils being developed and created within government departments in each of the Gulf countries to manage nationalization. The aim and agenda is quite simple: to increase nationals' present in the private sector, where it's even less than 5% in most of these Gulf countries.
Great. Thank you for that response, Harish. Another question that came through is, what trends do you see in compensation differentials between nationals, Western, Eastern, and Arab expats? And does Hay Group have cuts of this data?
I'll take that question. Middle East has actually always witnessed pay differentials based on nationality because it's primarily been an expat-driven market. So we do see that the gap between nationals and non-nationals has actually increased, and Harish actually even quoted the numbers. But there are smaller gaps between nationalities, and it's so particularly in the Eastern and Western nationals where they typically get paid similar and more so on job side.
Great. Thank you, Geeta, for your response. Another question that came in through the chat just now is, what role do allowances play in Middle Eastern pay packages, and what is the reason for this?
I think I mentioned this sometime in the presentation as well. Allowances play a very big role, mainly in the Gulf countries, where they form almost 25 to 50% of the total package. In countries like UAE and Qatar, where there is higher cost of living, we see allowances forming almost 45 to 50% of the total guaranteed package. There are various reasons for this. Of course, it's an expatriate-based policy in the past, and today it's become more local. Again, 85 to 90% of the employees in the private sector are expatriates. So these allowances are paid to really support their living in a country away from their home. What we see the advantage is for the employers is the more they put these amounts in allowances, the lesser it the more it reduces the liabilities that they have on end-of-service benefits or gratuity payments, because gratuity payments are made only on a calculation based on the basic salary. So generally, the employers have an advantage of keeping the basic salary low.
Great. Thank you, Harish, for sharing that information. Another question we have asks, what emerging industries do you see in MEA, Middle East, Africa, and how will this change reward in the region?
Speaking more about the Middle East, I would say we're seeing healthcare and education sectors really picking pace, specifically because the government is intensifying efforts of development and investing in these sectors. We see a lot of private players globally also wanting to come and invest here, schools from the US or from the UK and other countries of Europe. We also see healthcare organizations and larger hospitals coming in here to set up and grow their business here. Other than that, we always see the traditional sectors like retail and tourism growing, of course, with large-scale events coming into this market. We're also seeing media broadcasting, high technology, and some other sectors that were not very prevalent in this market are now coming and setting base for the Arab world, mainly in Dubai or in Jordan or in Lebanon.
All right, great. Thank you very much for sharing that. Just want to thank you both for going through those questions that came in. There are a few questions we didn't get to, but don't worry, Harish and Geeta will follow up with you accordingly and address any questions that you have. That concludes today's webinar. If you indicated that you wanted more information on any of our tools, a Hay Group representative will be in touch. And if you need to reach out directly, please feel free to reach out to both Harish and Geeta. Their contact information is displayed on the screen now. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and have a great rest of the day.